Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's live stream. My name is Matt Murray. I'm an educator here at the Wonders of Wildlife National Museum and Aquarium. Thank you for joining us today as we continue our live stream. So thank you for joining us as we continue our theme for the month of June, pollinators. So to download our Wonders of Wildlife app, go to www.wondersofwildlife.org/mission-conservation. This will take you to the Wonders of Wildlife webpage, where you can see the instructions on how to download the app. You can also see our activity guide for the month of June and the activity guide from months past. Joining us today, we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help us talk about pollinators. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thanks, Matt.
What do you have to talk to us about?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the pollinators that we have and some of the programs that we've established that are helping pollinators, and it's all youth oriented.
Excellent. That sounds exciting.
You never know what's going to happen when you're working with youth.
That's correct. All kinds of excitement and all kinds of fun.
Teresa, it's all you.
Begin? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, as he said, I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here in West Central Minnesota, but I don't work for a refuge. I actually work for what's called a wetland management district. And that's a little bit different. We have small parcels of land that we restore, and then it adds up to a lot of different acres. So let's see where I work. I work at what's called the Prairie Wetlands Learning Center in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. Now, our mission for the Prairie Wetlands Learning Center is to educate people about prairies and wetlands and how to restore them. And once you do, what will happen? And one of the things that I learned is once you restore the land back to what it was, a whole bunch of different things start to appear. Now, this is the campus that I work at. And I say campus because we're mainly here to educate. We have a barn that we've converted into a classroom. We have a dormitory that kids can come and spend the night with, or environmental groups can come and spend the night with. We have a visitor center for the public to come in and see our exhibits. We have an education wing that we partner with our local school district, where 100 fourth graders and 100 fifth graders go to school here at the Prairie Wetlands Learning Center every day of the school year. And then the very little building on the far is our greenhouse. We actually have a greenhouse that we plant with students, but I'll be telling you about that a little bit later. So this is our campus. We have 320 acres, 4 miles of trails, so lots of things to do. But the reason I'm here today is because I am a pollinator enthusiast. I am not an expert at all of the pollinators. I am an enthusiast, and that means I really like watching them and learning. So we are celebrating in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service this week, June 21st through June 27th, National Pollinator Week. Now, I personally, and I know all of you out there probably do too, but I celebrate pollinators all year round, because when I'm eating my blueberry smoothie and it's 30 below zero here in Minnesota, well, obviously I'm not going to be seeing any pollinators, but I sure can thank the pollinators that provided me with those blueberries. Or if I'm making a big pot of chili from my tomatoes from my garden, well, I can thank the pollinators for that too. So let's get started and see how we can help pollinators. And I say we because we can't, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, USGS, we can't do it by ourselves. We need all of us to help. And how can we help is something I'm going to talk a little bit about. And that's learning about what you have around you. Now, if you plant some plants in your garden, and if you're noticing that they're not getting much action, maybe you should look at planting natives. Now, this is a prairie rose that's native to West Central Minnesota. And if you plant natives, they will come. And then you have to do a little homework, because once animals start to appear, pollinators especially, you need to be able to identify them. And one of the things here, if you look on this little prairie rose, it can be anything that's as tiny as a little sweat bee or as big as this two-spotted bumblebee. The plant that this bumblebee is flying in to get the nectar from is called the Monarda fistulosa. And sometimes people call it bee balm. The purple color that you see is the actual native flower. There are some bee balms that you can buy domestically, and they've changed and altered the color to be red. But unfortunately, for those of you that are trying to bring in more pollinators, the bees don't actually see red. The one animal that does that still is a pollinator is a hummingbird. So know what you're planting. And I have a field guide that helps me identify what the prairie plants are. So I'm not out there just trying to figure it out on my own. Now, some of you can use a computer, but I'm still a book learner. Another great plant for pollinators is the swamp milkweed, or some of you may call it the marsh milkweed, but it's not just for monarchs. If you look here, we have a great black wasp. Now, some of you may think you need to swat that wasp because you don't like to have wasps around. But if you don't harm the wasp, if you just watch the wasp, it's not going to come after you and sting you. But if you happen to disturb where their nest is, then you have to be very cautious because they do not like disturbance. And if you think about it yourself, if you're in your own home and somebody is pounding on your door and it's disturbing you, you're going to come out a little bit mad too. So keep that in mind. Now, I said there's small things, tiny things that you can see that's a pollinator, from a little sweat bee to a big old bumblebee or a great wasp. But sneaking in your garden, hiding sometimes behind the petals of your flower, could be this little fella down at the bottom of your screen, and that is called a Hobo skipper. Now, if you think I know all about the Hobo, you would be mistaken, because I just met this little Hobo skipper a few weeks ago when a visitor was visiting our center here, and he took a picture of one that we had at the Prairie, and he said, look, if this is the species. I didn't know that, and then I found them here at the Prairie, and I found them at my own home. So you never know what you're going to find when you are looking, and you have to learn to look to see what's out there. Now, if you plant for the spring flowers, you need to plant for summer flowers, you need to plant for fall flowers. And if you look on this cup plant, this is one of the 3 tallest plants that we have in the Prairie. Cup plant is one, compass plant is the other, and prairie dock. They're all very pollinator friendly. So they can reach heights of 11 to 13 feet high. And that will come into play a little bit later in my PowerPoint, where you'll see how it gets a little difficult for something else. So this is the cup plant. Now the other one we're going to is a fall plant, and that is a checkered skipper, a common checkered skipper. You see, it's not very big. It's on a New England aster. So the next part of my PowerPoint is going to be about let's get planting, and let's see some of the programs that we here at the Prairie Wetlands Learning Center have been doing for up to 23 years in one case, 18 years in another, and just as recent as a month ago. So what we have going, that we partnered with the Fergus Falls Public Library. Now the public library, I saw, did Plant a Pocket of Prairie. It's a book by Phyllis Root, and they did it in a mowed area of a park that was across the street from the library, and they had picnic tables around, but there wasn't a single thing that a pollinator could eat. So I asked them if we could partner and bring it out to the prairie, and they were all for letting us use their story walk. We had about 30 different folks show up on very day at the prairie, but they enjoyed reading what might come to your prairie if you plant just a little pocket. At the end of the presentation, or at the end of the walk, they received packets of seeds that were the swamp or marsh milkweed that they could plant in their own garden. Those were provided to us from another partner, the United Prairie Foundation. So thanks to all the partners that we had a very successful first story walk. And now we're going to do more story walks. We don't know what the books are yet, but we're gonna figure it out because it was so much fun to do so. Now I just thought I would show you just a little pocket of prairie. If you look at this one, I know started off as a 5 by 5 foot plot, and then it increased in size. You can see there's a variety of colors. There's purples, yellows, light pinks. So pollinators like all sorts of colors, and they like flower consistency. So if you see here, this is that Monarda again, one of my favorite flowers, because during the prairie winds, when my hair looks a mess, this flower just kind of looks like my hair when it's a mess. So once you plant a pocket of prairie, you start your journey on pollinators. And that's where it comes in handy to start looking at different species and what plants they like. Now I know this person does a lot of planting of vegetables in pots. And if you look, there's a little long-horned bee that got into pollinating their squash or their pumpkins. So you benefit later on in the year if you have pollinators, So this is just a little pocket of prairie. It doesn't have to be 300 acres. It can be just 5 foot by 5 foot. Now another program that we have going here, I alluded to earlier, and that is the partnership that we have with our local school program. We have the 200 school students that go to school here every day, and they actually will collect seeds in the fall for us, and we store them over winter, and then we'll plant them back out in the prairie doing some winter seeding with them, and then we'll hold a few of the seeds back so that the students themselves can plant the seeds in our greenhouse. What they do is they will study the seeds first. We have the microscope set up with the seeds underneath, and they get to journal with their journal book. You can see one of them is laying there on the front of it, and I have a little close-up of it. Now, each student gets their own journal for their plants, and they get to grow both grasses and wildflowers that we call forbs in the prairie world. And the reason they have 2 different 6-packs, like I have here, I have a little 6-pack. If you can see, it has names and numbers on it. The students do not know what their plants are. throughout the next month or two, they will get lessons in the greenhouse by our greenhouse naturalist. And she will tell them all about root systems, about what they're looking at, how to use a dichotomous key. And oh, by the way, I didn't learn how to use a dichotomous key until I was in college. And these guys are in 4th and 5th grade, and they now know how to use dichotomous keys to identify their plants. They have to learn if it's a monocot or a dicot. And so it's a very interesting partnership, because once they learn that, then they get to do something later on, right as the last week of school, is they bring their parents out, and then they go out into the prairie. We've designated a certain area where they can go and just plant their plants in the prairie. And let me tell you, it's one of the most exciting things for our 4th and 5th graders, because they want to see their plants grow into healthy adult plants that bring in lots of pollinators. So if it weren't for the prairie science class and their plants, we wouldn't have the variety and diversity that we do in the prairie. Another program that we have going periodically, it's not every year, but it's every other year, every 3rd year, depending on the funding, is what we call the Youth Conservation Corps. The Youth Conservation Corps. These young people, they're 17 and 18 years old, will come out and do a variety of different things to help the Fish and Wildlife Service. So this week they were helping with the planting of some of the greenhouse plants in an area that had been disturbed when we did a new trail. So with their help and their muscle, we got probably about 300 to 400 plants into the ground to help pollinators. You saw the yarrow was going in. We had black-eyed Susan, blanket flowers. All of those were helping us have a more diverse prairie. Another program that we have going here this year, is the first time we've done it, is we have partnered with our county, and they have a special career youth program that is helping young people learn life skills about jobs. And so they're helping in a greenhouse and out in the prairie. One of the things that they're responsible for is they're responsible for taking and helping water our plants in the greenhouse. They help us organize our greenhouse. They're helping continue on with different things, transplanting. They just transplanted that whole flat there, learning all about the different species. And then they get to help us putting it out in the prairie too. So these are our 3 career force workers right there. You see their auger, they're taking out invasive species, and they're actually a lot of help to us, because we could not do it without our Youth Conservation Corps. And the last program I'm going to talk about is our longest running program that we have here at the Prairie Wetlands Learning Center. And many of you can do this at your own home, in your own yard, if you want to help the monarch butterfly. We have been tagging monarchs with the University of Kansas Citizen Science Project for, this will be our 23rd year. And some of you may have never even known that you can put a tag on a monarch. And what we do now is, when we started 22 years ago, it was me and another person, and we caught 8 butterflies and put tags on them. And the next year they found one of our butterflies down in Mexico. Well, then I was hooked. That was it. I'm gonna teach people how to catch butterfly the correct way. And if you remember, I told you some of our plants can grow up to 13 feet. Well, try and catch a butterfly that's 5 feet above you that you can't reach. So you can see here, one of our youth, we're trying to catch a butterfly, and it's, you know, over their head, we can't see them. So we teach our young people how to catch them. how to get them out of the net, how to hold them correctly, and how to get a tag on them. And if you see from our young person's face, they absolutely love what they're doing here. It is so much fun. And then we have to do the release of the butterfly. And a lot of times we'll let our little friends release it on their nose, on their hand. They can feel the feet of the butterfly. It's very exciting for them. You can see they're releasing it on a flower so that animal gets its nectar. The other thing that is crucial for any citizen science program is please fill out your paperwork. You have to figure out if it's male or female. You write it down. You put in the date, where it was found. All that information is critical to the university because they are trying to figure out migration patterns, when the monarchs are going, where they're going. And believe it or not, over the last 22 years, we have tagged well over 5,000 monarchs. We've had over 60 returns. Four of the places were found in Mexico, one in South Dakota, and one in Iowa. So it's so worth it to fill out that paperwork to find out more information about your monarchs. So I'm gonna sound a little corny here. One of my favorite books is by Dr. Seuss. And if you have read the book, The Lorax, you know that the truffula trees were having problems. And it takes just one person and one seed to be able to celebrate and bring these pollinators back. So I'm not the Lorax, but I speak for the bees. But you know, the Lorax trees don't have tongues, but our bees do. And if you were to look up in this book that I have, The Pollinators of Native Plants, they actually have how long bee tongues are. So it only takes one person, one plant, and then you'll have many, many pollinators to enjoy. Now, one last thing that I do is I keep journals, and you see I don't spend a lot on them, but I record when I see a pollinator and if I identify it. So my last one that I recorded was the leaf skipper on the 12th and 13th of June. So keep a journal. If you want more information, you can just go to these websites to find out more about what's going on this week, thepollinator.org. There's monarchwatch.org, will give you a lot of good information. And the Xerces Society they have wonderful websites and lots of good information. So thank you for having me. I hope you have learned some things, and it's back to you, Matt. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. We did have a question. I was curious, I saw that picture of the great black wasp. Many people think of wasps as predatory animals, and the wasp was on the flower. So could you talk a little bit about the role that, say, wasps play in pollination?
They actually are pollinators, and they are predators at some point in their life, but usually at the very beginning of the spring, there's not very much food for them to eat. And so they eat the pollen that they find on the flowers. It's later on in their life that they need protein to be able to survive. And so that's when they start feeding on their animals. And they're not as scary when you get to know them. I try to give them respect.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. There was a lot of great information on how to help the pollinators and the programs that you have with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help them as well. As we bring this live stream to a close, I want to thank you for tuning in today. Before we go, I want to leave you with this question. How can you help the pollinators in and around the place that you live? So tune in next week as we continue partnering with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at 1 p.m. Central Time. We hope to see you then, and remember, we all live downstream.